Okay, there we go. All right, so let's start off with Proposition 1. And Proposition 1 is a legislative constitutional amendment, so it was put on the ballot by the legislature. It required a 2/3 vote of both houses of the legislature, and it will take effect the day after the election. And it's about reproductive rights. So, of course, the background is due to the recent U.S. Supreme Court decision. The right to an abortion is no longer protected by the U.S. Constitution. So individual states now have the flexibility to decide whether to allow or limit or ban abortions. Federal law still protects the right to buy and use contraceptives, and it also requires most health insurance plans to pay for contraceptives. And the California Constitution guarantees the right to privacy, but it doesn't actually define what that right includes. So the Supreme Court, California Supreme Court, has said that the right to privacy includes the right to make reproductive choices. And we also have state law that protects these rights. And there are some restrictions on abortions in California. Abortion providers must be licensed, and an abortion may only be performed on a viable fetus if the pregnancy puts the health or life of the pregnant person at risk. And right now there's some question about what the word viable means, because a lot of it depends on the individual pregnancy. So that's something that people are concerned about. Anyway, so the proposal is that Proposition 1 would amend the California Constitution to say that the state cannot deny or interfere with a person's reproductive freedom, and that people have a fundamental right whether or not to have an abortion or to use contraceptives. The fiscal implications, and so we have an office up in Sacramento called the Legislative Analyst, and this group of people are they do just sort of unbiased analysis of the sorry about the phone. They do an unbiased analysis, fiscal analysis of the measures. And so anyway, the legislative analyst expects that since the rights to reproductive freedom already exist in California, passage of Proposition 1 would have no direct fiscal monetary effect. So the supporters of Proposition 1 include the chair of the California Medical Association, Planned Parenthood of California, and the president of the California Nurses Association. And they say that Proposition 1 ensures a fundamental right to choose to have an abortion, and it also protects access to contraceptives. They say that Proposition 1 doesn't change how or when a person may access abortion under California law. And they say that this proposition would keep reproductive medical decisions where they belong with individuals and their healthcare providers. And so far, supporters have raised about $3 million. And that has come from Planned Parenthood, from the ACLU, and from the California Teachers Association. They have contributed money towards this. So the opponents of Proposition 1 include a gynecologist, the president of the International Faith-Based Coalition, and the president of something called the Pacific Justice Institute. And they say Proposition 1 is not needed, and it will cost millions of taxpayer dollars in lawsuits and court challenges. They say it allows late-term abortions without limitations, and they say it will turn California into a sanctuary state at enormous cost to us taxpayers. And there have been no donations to date in opposition to Proposition 1. So the question is, should the California Constitution be amended to specifically protect the right to an abortion and access to reproductive care as they exist under California law? And I just wanted to point out, I should have mentioned this at the beginning, that the arguments that I'm giving are not arguments that I or the league just thought up. These are the actual arguments that are printed in the state ballot pamphlet. So these are the actual arguments that the supporters and the opponents have made. And the league does not judge the truthfulness of these arguments. We just present them as is, and I guess it's up to the voters to decide whether they agree or disagree with the truthfulness of the arguments. So that's proposition 1. Any questions? I'm not seeing any hands raised. Let me see if there's hands raised. Okay, if not.
Guess we're all clear on that one.
Yeah, okay. We're going to go on to the really fun ones now. Propositions 26 and 27, and I'm sure you've been tearing your hair out watching the commercials hour after hour on television. What I'm going to do is give a brief introduction that will apply to both 26 and 27, and then we'll go over each one individually. But to start off with, Props 26 and 27 both concern sports wagering. And in 2018, the United States Supreme Court struck down a federal law that banned sports betting in every state except Nevada. So Nevada was the only place people could do sports betting. So since 2018, 36 states and the District of, excuse me, I'm going to turn this phone off. Sorry. Okay, so anyway, since 2018, when the Supreme Court struck down that law, there are 36 states and the District of Columbia that have legalized sports betting in one form or another. So California, they wanted to get California into the act. So Props 26 and 27 found their way onto the ballot. And by the way, if you think that just because sports betting is illegal in California, that it doesn't happen, well, guess again. There was a study in 2019 that estimated that Californians place billions, that's billions with a B, of dollars in sports bets through bookies or offshore companies. And so then we have the 7 big gambling firms whose names you've seen on TV: DraftKings, FanDuel, Bally's, MGM. They're looking at California as a gold mine as far as sports betting. So there's several different factions that are involved with this whole thing. 26 and 27 in some ways are a conflict between tribes that have casinos and those that don't. And then there's another faction, which are the card rooms. And if you've driven around to Commerce, Hawaiian Gardens, Bell Gardens, they have these card rooms. Card rooms are allowed to do some specific types of gambling, and they provide income to the cities where they're located. And it's they've found that there are some cities who get up to 70% of their revenue from these card rooms. So they're really interested in, to see if people would quit going to the card rooms and do this sports betting somewhere else. And then the national sports franchises are also got in on this, the NFL and Major League Baseball, because they think that sports betting is a way to keep younger people interested in the games. But the other interesting thing is that sports betting has been found by researchers to be the most addictive kind of gambling. And that's because gambling, like with slot machines, you just press the button and it's luck. It's either you win or you lose. But people who do sports betting, they think, well, I'm winning because I have special knowledge. I know about this, and because they have that feeling that they're sort of in control, it's a much more addictive kinds of gambling than just the stuff that you're just pressing a button and seeing what happens. So this battle between 26 and 27 is going to be the most expensive battle in American history. Altogether, between 26 and 27, I just recently heard on the radio, the most recent total is $400 million has been spent on these, trying to get these passed or not passed. And that easily surpasses the 200 million that was spent a couple of years ago by those rideshare companies when they wanted to pass that Proposition 22. So we'll go look at the details of each of these two measures. And if both of them pass, and there are conflicting parts between the two measures, the part in the measure that gets the most votes will prevail. And so that'll be interesting because someone's going to have to decide what exactly constitutes a conflict. So all that being said, let's look at Prop 26. Proposition 26 is an initiative constitutional amendment and statute. So that means that it was put on the ballot by people collecting signatures, and it changes both the state constitution and state law. And the subject is in-person sports betting, and also allowing some new types of gambling on tribal lands. So the background on this is the California Constitution and our state law limit gambling in California. So we can have the state lottery, we have card rooms, we have horse racing, and then we have some types of gambling in the Indian casinos, basically slot machines and keno, stuff like that. So in 2021, the tribes that have these casinos paid about $65 million back to the state to support regulation and gambling addiction. And the larger tribal casinos also pay millions each year to smaller tribes that either have no casinos or have fewer than 350 slot machines. And the rules for what the tribes have to do are negotiated. Each tribe has a separate negotiation with the states called a compact. And so California has right now compacts with 79 different tribes. There are 66 casinos in the state and 28 counties. And again, a lot of sports betting already goes on in California, but it's illegal, so the state gets no income from it. So the proposal, Prop 26, would allow in-person sports betting at California's 4 privately operated racetracks for people over 21. So those racetracks are Santa Anita, Del Mar, Los Alamitos, and Golden Gate Field. So you could go there in person and make a sports bet on something other than just horse racing. Prop 26 would create a new fund called the California Sports Wagering Fund, and racetracks would have to pay 10% of their sports bets, less the prizes that they give out, into this fund. And then the fund would be used to help meet California's K through 14 education funding. And then it would also go to some regulatory costs. And then a little bit more money would go to gambling addiction treatment. So that's the racetrack part of it. Then the other part is 26 would allow in-person sports betting at casinos, and it would also allow additional types of betting at casinos. So right now, like I said, they can do card game slot machines, but this would also allow them to do roulette, craps, things like that. They would have to amend the compact, which is the contract they have with the state. But once they would amend that, then they could have these additional types of gambling. And the revised compacts would also include rules about minimum age for betting, and how much the tribes would have to pay to state and local governments, and how much they would pay into this sports wagering fund. Prop 26 would ban betting on sports, high school sports games, and it would also ban betting on games in which California colleges participate. So you could bet on like a game between Washington and Washington State, but you couldn't bet on a game between UCLA and Washington State. And the other thing about Prop 26, it would allow any individual or entity who thinks that these gambling laws are being violated, they could file a civil lawsuit against whoever they thought was violating the law, with a penalty up to $10,000 per violation. And they could only be allowed to file these lawsuits if they first tell the California Department of Justice that they think that there's something fishy going on. And then if the Department of Justice doesn't handle it, then the individual person can file one of these lawsuits. And any damages that are awarded would go into that sports wagering fund. So the fiscal implications, the legislative analyst expects that the fiscal implications, the effects would depend largely on how many people choose to make sports bets and how the compacts with the tribes are negotiated. So for example, state income could increase by tens of millions of dollars a year, depending on how many people decide to make sports bets legally. Local governments could receive less income from the card rooms if people switch to going to tribal casinos or the racetrack to gamble. There could be increased regulatory and enforcement costs, which the analyst says could be in the low tens of millions of dollars. But some of that would be offset by the sports wagering fund or by civil penalties. And then state and local revenue could increase if people come from out of state to gamble, but this increased traffic could also require additional law enforcement. So the bottom line, and I just had to say this, the bottom line is pretty much it's a crapshoot. And so anyway, the supporters of Prop 26 include the American Indian Chamber of Commerce and members of several California tribes, and the NAACP supports this. And they say that Prop 26 would promote Indian self-reliance and it would provide millions of dollars to smaller, poorer tribes. They say it's the most responsible approach to sports wagering because it provides the strongest age verification safeguards so that prevent underage gambling. They say that it contains provisions to enforce California's gaming laws and crack down on illegal activity that goes on in the card clubs. And just as a side, there's been a long-running kind of feud between the tribes and the card clubs. Tribes think that the card clubs are doing things that they oughtn't. And then the other thing that supporters say that this will benefit all of California by providing jobs and state and local revenue to the governments. Currently, the supporters have raised $73 million, and this has mostly come from the tribes that have casinos. The opponents include the Los Angeles SPCA, the National Veterans Foundation, and the California Black Chamber of Commerce. And they say that these 5 wealthy tribes that are supporting Prop 26, they just want to expand their monopoly on gambling in California, and they're going to make billions in profits while paying virtually no taxes. They say that nothing in Prop 26 prevents tribal casinos from allowing individuals under 18 to gamble on their premises. They say that 26 would put card clubs out of business, and that would cause serious financial issues for communities of color. And they also say that Prop 26 was designed to save the horse racing industry, which they say drugs, abuses, and kills horses. And the opponents have raised about $42 million, and this has mostly come from the card rooms and their developers.
From 3235622.
So the question is, should the California Constitution and California law be changed to allow in-person sports betting at racetracks and tribal casinos, and should additional types of gambling be allowed at tribal casinos? So a yes vote means you like these changes, and a no vote means that you don't want these changes. So that's Prop 26. So any questions on that?
Yes. My concern is the word constitutional. That's part of the initiative here, because I'm just thinking if the United States, in doing its Constitution in 1776, dealt with all of this level of proposition, what a mess this country would be in. And I'm opposed to the constitutional aspect of it, that once it's passed, it would be part of the Constitution, and trying to change that.
Yeah, it'd be part of the California
Constitution,
right,
of course, but still.
And by the way,
the concept of trying to, make it permanent versus trying to legislate it.
Yeah. And by the way, the California Constitution is, I think, the second or third largest in the world. because we the voters keep sticking stuff into it. So
Yep, I know, it's ridiculous.
any other questions, concerns? Let's see, Barbara Madden.
Right. I have a question about these civil suits. It sounds like the anti-abortion thing in the South. Are there any limits to, someone can bring suit and then you have to defend? Are there any controls about who pays for what or what happens?
I don't believe so.
How does this,
The only control is, that you have to have checked with the Department of Justice first to make sure they haven't done anything, and then you just go ahead.
And I don't like Robbie, and I heard her say something.
No. Okay.
Robbie, I have a question.
Okay.
I'm over here. I'm Elsa.
Okay.
This has nothing to do with our state lottery,
No, nothing.
anything like, which is a sort of like a gambling.
It is definitely gambling, but yet, no, it has nothing to do with the lottery. That
Okay,
passage of this wouldn't affect the lottery one way or the other.
thank you.
Robbie, this is Betty Ann. Does the league take a position on any of these?
Okay. Oh, I should have mentioned that at the beginning. Because I'm acting in a voter service capacity,
Oh,
I am not allowed to talk about the
Okay.
league's position because we can't mix education with advocacy. But if you want to know, the league has taken position on only 2 of these. And if you go to LWVC, League of Women Voters of California, LWVC.org, there's a thing right at the top of the main page that will tell you which ones the league has taken a position on.
okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Yeah, Dan? You're muted.
Dan, you're muted.
I'm off. Please
Okay.
don't get excited. The 4 racetracks that you identified currently don't have gambling in them. Would passage of one of those propositions allow them to have other types of gambling in addition to
No,
the off track?
no, just sports betting.
Thank you. That was my question.
Okay,
Okay, this is Laura Guillory.
yeah,
If 26 passed and people wanted to have it rescinded, what would have to take place to
well, there would
take
have to,
play?
there would have to be another initiative drive. So people would have to get together and collect signatures and have it qualified for the ballot. So
And if it's a constitutional amendment, what's the percentage? Is it the percentage of people in the Senate or the House that have to?
well, this was put on the ballot by an initiative, so it had nothing to do with the legislature. It
So
was
it
just,
doesn't require votes from the members of the legislature. It would
No.
have to be passed as an initiative to
Correct.
cancel it out. Okay.
yeah.
And is there any, the percentage of money, it's like one of the things I have is like, we had the lottery. It's like, there's a lot of money that goes in. Is there any way to track how much money is given to which state, that comes from that if it passes? How is that tracked? Who does that? Who enforces it?
I would assume it's the state controller, the state treasurer would be tracking that, and then this whoever manages this California Sports Wagering Fund would be tracking that. So I would think that there would be a freedom of information thing where you could go to the state government and they would be able to tell you how much money's coming in and where it goes.
Would that be that the person that's managing that fund, is that an elected or an appointed position
That would be an appointed position.
by the governor?
Yes. Or the legislature, I'm not sure which. Wayne, you had a question?
Yeah, it's actually more of a comment. I get the feeling that legalizing any kind of betting would be the same as legalizing marijuana. The state thought that would solve all its problems and they would just have to shovel the money into the state treasury. Instead, it's made the illegal marijuana industry even bigger than it was before. So I'm just wondering if this will end up doing the same thing, because there'll be so many people with their hands in the pot for legalized gambling that people will still go to the illegal gambling venues to put their money.
It's possible. It's hard to say, but Anyway, so let's, if there's no more questions, let's go to 27, which is the other opponent. And again, this is an initiative, constitutional amendment and statute. So it was put on the ballot by people collecting signatures, and it changes constitution and law. And the subject of this is online sports wagering. So the other one was in person. You had to be there in person. This is online. So the background on this is basically the same background as on Prop 26 with, that California doesn't allow gambling except for, the lottery and horse racing and things like this. So, and again, California is looking at, and the big gambling companies are also looking at other states and saying, ooh, here's a good opportunity. So anyway, the proposal for Prop 27 would amend the Constitution and laws to allow online sports betting anywhere in California for people who are 21 years of age or older. So the betting operators would have to develop some kind of controls or methods to verify the age of the bettor. They would have to verify the location of the bettor. The bettor would have to be physically in California. And they would have to verify that the bettor is not a player, is not a coach, is not a referee or a team owner. And they would not allow any betting on high school sports or elections. I guess elections are now a sport. Who knew? But anyway, so some of the individual things that about this measure is that the tribes could offer on their own online sports betting under their own name and branding, and they would pay, every tribe that wanted to do this would pay a one-time $10 million fee to the state. And then every 5 years, they would, I think, pay another $1 million. So that's the tribes. Then there are these gaming companies, which I mentioned earlier, like FanDuel and Bally's and MGM. They could offer online sports betting under the auspices of a tribe. And those gaming companies would have to pay a one-time $100 million fee to the state. And then again, a renewal fee every 5 years. And also any gaming company that wants to get a license in California would have to be licensed in at least 10 other states. So this kind of sounds like the big gambling companies don't want smaller ones horning in on their profits. So anyway, both tribes and gaming companies would have to pay a state tax of 10% of the amount of the bets that are placed, but there are quite a few deductions that are allowed from that. So from that 10%, they could deduct all the prizes that they paid out. They could deduct any federal taxes that they have to pay. And they also could deduct something called promotional bets. And so I'm not being a sports bettor, I wasn't quite sure what this was, but apparently when these gambling companies want to get you hooked, they will say, oh, you can have a free $1,000 bet. Just make a bet, it'll cost you without, it won't cost you anything. And then, they're hoping that that will then get you in and you'll be making more bets that you actually have to pay for. So all those promotional bets are also able to be deducted from that 10% that's supposed to go to the state. So the money that comes to the state after the regulatory costs are covered, and this would go into another fund called the California Online Sports Betting Trust Fund. And that money would not count as general fund revenue, and it wouldn't count for how the calculation for the Prop 98, the school minimum funding, it wouldn't count towards that. So of that money, whatever is left after the deductions and stuff, 85% of that money would have to be spent on homelessness and on mental health problems associated with gambling addiction. And then the remaining 15% would go to the tribes that don't have sports betting. And the trust money could be used for no other purposes. So it's locked into those two purposes. And then it would create, 27 would create a new division under the state's Justice Department to regulate online sports wagering. And they would have to keep track of all the bets placed and by whom. And again, there would be penalties for infractions, and all that would go into the trust fund. So the fiscal implications of this is that the legislative analyst expects that states and local governments could receive increased revenue from Prop 27, but the amount is uncertain. It might be possible for tribes to reduce payments to their local governments if people gambled more online instead of coming to the
I'm
casinos.
gonna go. I have to go to my appointment.
Okay. The legislative analyst estimates that overall revenue would be no more to the state about $500 million annually. But then there would be costs, which would include the amount of money required to regulate the operators. And that would depend on how many operators there are and how many betting options they offer. The legislative analyst estimates that the total cost could be in the tens of millions of dollars. And state and local governments might also have additional costs because they have to assist people that have gambling addiction. So the supporters of Prop 27 include the San Diego Regional Task Force on Homelessness. Several Indian tribes support this, and the leader of a mental health nonprofit. And they say that Prop 27 would provide hundreds of millions of dollars to support programs that alleviate homelessness and addiction, that it'll benefit every California tribe, especially the ones that don't own casinos. It requires state-of-the-art systems to ensure that no minors are allowed to place bets. And it does require annual audits to this trust fund to ensure that the money is being spent properly. And to date, supporters of this have raised about $100 million. All of that has come from those big betting companies, DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM, Bally's. And interestingly, none of the money has come from the tribal representatives that you see in the commercials supporting 27. They have not donated any money. It's all come from these large gambling firms. The opponents of 27 include several Indian tribes, the Salvation Army, the Democratic Party, and the California Teachers Association. And they say that Prop 27 is a deceptive measure that's promoted by out-of-state companies to enrich themselves. They say online gambling is not a solution to homelessness, and it actually could worsen the problem if people become addicted to gambling. They say that the easy availability of digital devices and the opportunity for live action betting, it raises the chances of developing an addiction. And the promotional bets loophole, the one I talked about where they can deduct that from the 10%. Apparently that's been implemented in some other states, and it's already caused the revenue to fall far below what was ever promised by the gambling companies. And to date, about $114 million has been raised in opposition, and this has come from the tribes that own casinos. So the question is, should California allow online and mobile sports betting for people 21 years of age or older? So questions? Anybody? Hands raised? Don't see anything. Okay. All right. Let's go to Proposition 28. Proposition 28 is an initiative statute, so people collected signatures, and it has to do with arts and music funding in the public schools. So the California Constitution, by way of Prop 98, which was passed in 1988, requires a minimum percentage, about 40% of the state budget, calculated annually, has to be spent on K through 14 education. However, there is no stipulation as to how much has to be spent on music and arts as opposed to other subjects. State law requires that students in grades 1 through 6 must receive arts and music education. High school students must complete at least a year of art or music education to graduate. But the details about how all these requirements are going to be met, it's left up to local school boards. And again, there are there are just richer districts, poorer districts. Some of them have local funds that help support different programs in their district. So the proposal is that Prop 28 would require the state to set aside a separate amount of at least 1% of what Prop 98 funding guarantees to pay for arts and music education. So this is not taking away from Prop 98. It's saying, let's figure out what 1% of that is, and that'll be an additional pot that we'll take out of the general fund and use it specifically for arts and music education. More funding would be allocated to schools that have a large proportion of low-income students, and schools would have to report how they use the funds. Larger schools would be required to spend 80% of the funds to employ new staff, and the remaining 20% would go for training and supplies. So the fiscal implications are that Prop 28 would increase state expenditures by about $1 billion a year over Prop 98 requirements. So the supporters include the California Teachers Association and the California PTA, and they say that art and music education can improve a student's personal and academic life. They say that there's fewer than 1 in 5 schools right now have a dedicated teacher for art and music programs. And they say that Prop 28 does not raise taxes. And to date, supporters have raised about $8 million. And a lot of that's come from Austin Butner, who is a philanthropist. He used to be the superintendent of LAUSD. Steve Ballmer from Microsoft has donated, and the Fender Guitar Company has donated to Prop 28. And as far as the opponents, there have been no arguments submitted in opposition to Prop 28. So the question is, I mean, the only one that people have mentioned in other presentations I met is that if you're taking $1 billion a year and setting that aside, then it might, well, probably will cut the money that has to go to some other program. So, you know, anyway, so the question is, should the state provide specific funding for arts and music education in public schools that's in addition to what's required by Prop 98? So any questions on 28? Okay, let's go to 29. Oh, wait, Dave?
Well, I'm picturing a low-income school. And what I'm hearing is that they're not getting another dime, but they have chosen not to provide art and music education because they can't. But now they're being forced to. Is that correct?
Well, they will get this money and it has to be used for arts and music. So if you want to, you know, if that's forcing it to provide that kind of education, then yeah, I guess you're right. They'll get it, and then they'll have to, you know, use the money appropriately.
But it's extra money.
It's extra money. It's on top of whatever Prop 98 would give them. Any other questions? Okay, let's go to 29. And this is like deja vu all over again. 29 is an initiative statute, and it has to do with the regulation of kidney dialysis clinics. So the background on this is there's about 80,000 patients in California who get dialysis services from about 650 chronic dialysis clinics. And the clinics are licensed by the California Department of Health, and they use federal standards when they're operations. And they often operate long hours, 6 days a week, because a lot of the people who have to get these services work. And so they have to come in at extended hours. There's 2 for-profit companies that operate 75% of the clinics in California. One of them is called DaVita. They're in Colorado, and the other one is Fresenius Medical Care, who are actually headquartered in Germany. And then the rest of the clinics are operated by kind of a variety of nonprofits and for-profit entities. And patients that are on dialysis are covered by Medicare generally or Medi-Cal, both of which government programs pay a fixed rate for the services. And then about 10% of the patients are covered by individual and group health policies that generally pay the clinic more because they negotiate their payments individually with each insurance company. So the proposal is for Prop 29 that it would require a licensed physician, nurse practitioner, or physician assistant to, in each case, they would have to have at least 6 months experience in kidney care. One of those people would have to be on site at all times when dialysis is being performed. And if they can't find a person like that to be on site, they can use telehealth for up to 1 year. The clinics, the other things that Prop 29 would require, clinics have to report the name of any physician who has more than a 5% financial interest in the clinic. They would require that clinics not discriminate between patients, whether they're paid by a government program or a private insurance. The clinics would have to report information about dialysis-related infections among their patients. And actually, this is something that's already required by federal law. And the clinics would have to get permission from the state if they want to close or reduce their hours. And so, like I said, there have been 2 previous similar initiatives, one in 2018, one in 2020. They had a lot of similarities. The difference is that 29 has this requirement for on-site personnel and also the reporting of ownership. Both of those initiatives were backed by the Service Employees International Union, United Healthcare Workers West. And both of them lost by substantial margins. And all 3 of these initiatives represent a long-running conflict between the clinics and the union. The union is claiming that employees that say they want to unionize are targeted. And so the union that's why the union is involved in this. They want to unionize the clinics. So the fiscal implications, there could be both to the clinics and to the government. The clinics would probably have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars more each year for staff salaries. State and local governments might have to pay tens of millions of dollars more annually if clinics close and the patients have to go to more expensive facilities like an emergency room. So there's fiscal effects in a couple different places. The supporters of, and these are people who have signed the arguments in the official government brochure, voter guide. The supporters include a dialysis patient care technician, the president of the Baptist Ministers Conference of Los Angeles, and a dialysis patient. They're supporting it. And they say that requiring a physician, nurse practitioner, or physician's assistant to be present during a dangerous procedure like dialysis is just common sense. It's a matter of patient safety. They say that dialysis clinics can use telehealth up to a year if the required healthcare workers isn't available. And they say that the big corporations who operate these clinics can easily make up the required staffing charges and still provide, still profit by hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And the supporters have raised to date about $8 million. And almost all that money has come from the union, the Service Employees International Union, United Healthcare Workers West. The opponents include the executive director of the American Nurses Association of California, a dialysis patient, and the president of the California Medical Association. And the opponents say that dialysis is administered by specially trained technicians, and every dialysis patient is under the care of their own kidney doctor. That makes this administrative oversight unnecessary. And actually, federal law requires that every patient see their doctor at least once a month. That's already a federal requirement. The opponents say that Prop 29 would worsen our healthcare worker shortage And it would take thousands of people from hospitals where they're needed and put them in administrative jobs. And they say the unnecessary requirement for on-site administrators who do not provide patient care would cost hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and that would force clinics to close or reduce their hours. And to date, about $36 million has been raised in opposition, and that's come from those two companies, the Fresenius and DaVita. They're those two companies that operate 3/4 of the clinics in California. So the question is, should dialysis clinics be required to have additional administrative staff on site at all times? And should they be required to report clinic ownership information to the patients? So yes votes means you want these changes, and a no vote means you don't. Elsa, you had a question? You're muted. You're muted.
Okay, now I'm not. If we vote no on this, that would take the state out of the clinics. What would happen then? Who would be responsible for the dialysis?
There would be,
Those clinics are closed.
if we vote no on this, there would be no change. Nothing would change. There would, if we vote yes, that's when clinics might close. And if clinics close, they would just close unless they found another business that wanted to open it. But the clinics, if we vote no and this measure does not pass, then there would be no change. Nothing would change as far as who owns the clinics or who operates them. Laura, you're muted.
My question is, okay, I noticed you said administrative staff. So that's not the same as having a doctor or a nurse. That's what I'm confused about. They're asking for administrative staff to be on site.
They're what they're asking for is a physician, nurse practitioner, or physician assistant, but those people would not be doing any medical care at all. They would just
okay. But they would be people that would be certified in terms of their ability to provide medical care. I mean, in other words, they can't provide medical care. I'm wondering what these people are going to be doing.
Well, I guess that's what the people who oppose this are thinking. I mean, like I said, these people, the licensed physician, nurse practitioner, or physician assistant, one of the requirements is that they have, whoever they are, they at least have to have 6 months of experience in kidney care. So they would theoretically be able to provide care, but the idea is that they're not providing care. They're just there to keep an eye on
overseeing things.
Yeah.
Okay, so the other question I had was that they'd be able to use telehealth for a year. So what happens at the end of a year? Can they do it for another year?
My impression from reading it is that it's up to a year, and then either they would have to find a live person or close.
Okay, my other question is, are there any records or any reports on outcomes and issues with patients in states where they may have required those people to be in place? I mean, is there any history, any documentation that has been made available?
I'm glad you asked. Actually, someone found for me an article. It's from the Journal of the American Society of Nephrology from 2018. And they say that there's 8 states that require, have this mandate for having people on site. And so they did a study of outcomes and patient satisfaction between those 8 states and California. And it turns out that California outcomes, even though we don't have any kind of these staffing requirements, we actually have some of the best outcomes in the United States. About 68% of California patients rated their facility a 9 or a 10 on a 1 to 10 scale, as opposed to 63% of patients in the states with mandated staffing ratios. So apparently having those extra people on staff does not improve outcomes.
Okay, that to me is one of the things to be most important.
Okay, Ted and Lucille, Lucine, yeah.
Yeah, that last question was very close to mine. I just wanted to know if this is fixing a real problem. Is there a record of medical problems in the absence of medical professionals?
Yeah.
And yeah, apparently not. Cecilia?
Oh, I was going to say, I have a relative who was on dialysis, not going into a clinic, at home 7 days a week. Her husband was trained and she and her husband administered everything. I mean, they had backup support. They were trained and they had somebody they could call, but there are plenty of people who don't have a doctor administering or overseeing and whatever. And it seems if you only need 6 months of training, the technicians who are already there helping people probably have more training than the people they're requiring you to hire.
That's possible. So any additional questions? If not, we'll go to measure 30. Measure 30 is another initiative statute. And it has to do with an income tax increase that would fund air pollution reduction and wildfire prevention. So California has a number of programs to promote zero emission vehicles, basically electric cars. And one of the programs requires the rideshare companies like Lyft and Uber to have 90% of their drivers use zero emission vehicles by 2030. But those vehicles are expensive. And also the other problem is the state's electrical grid needs upgrades to be able to provide the capacity to service all these electric vehicles. In 2006 and 2016, the legislature passed bills that requires California to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions back to 1990 levels by 2020 or 2020. So we probably have missed that already, and 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. And so the California Air Resources Board is responsible for developing policies to meet these goals. And actually, they just issued a regulation in August that requires 35% of the new vehicles that are sold in California have to be zero emissions by 2026, so like 4 years from now. And by 2035, 100% of the vehicles sold in California have to be zero emissions. And the other thing people point out is that California currently has a budget surplus of $97 billion. So Prop 30, the proposal would raise the income tax rate by 1 3/4% on individuals with incomes over $2 million. These extra funds would be allocated. 45% would promote the purchase of zero emission vehicles. That would be subsidies and rebates for passenger vehicles, and also would apply to some medium and heavy duty vehicles like trucks and buses and things like that. 35% of the funds would go to increase the infrastructure, so building more charging stations. And then 20% would help fund wildfire suppression and prevention. CAL FIRE, who is the organization that runs all of the wildfire fighting things, they have to make hiring and training additional firefighters a top priority. And as far as the zero emission vehicle purchase and infrastructure, at least half of the money has to go to low income communities. So they would put more charging stations in low income communities and also have more of the rebates and subsidies go to those communities. And this tax increase would actually sunset in 2043. So that's 20 years from now, or earlier if we meet our emissions goals. So if we get to the 40% below 1990 levels earlier than 2043, then they would take away this tax increase. So the legislative analyst expects that Prop 30 would generate somewhere between $3.5 and $5 billion annually, and it could help decrease the costs to state and local governments if wildfires are reduced. However, this extra spending actually causes another little blip. We have something called the GAN limit in California, and it was passed around the same time that Prop 13 was passed. And it's basically just a flat limit on how much the state can spend, and it's adjusted for inflation every year. But we've never actually, or I guess just one time we have exceeded the GAN limit. But if we have this extra money, there are people that are concerned that it would exceed this GAN limit that we have. Also, another issue for fiscal is that these zero emissions vehicles, it could increase the amount of tax revenue from electricity, but it also could decrease the amount, or would decrease the amount of gas tax revenue. And that's gas tax revenue is which stuff that supports fixing the roads. And there's also some other program, early childhood education, that's funded by gas tax. So bottom line is the net fiscal effect of all this is unknown. The supporters of Proposition 30 include the California State Firefighters Association, the American Lung Association, and the National Resource Defense Council. And they say that existing programs are not sufficient to address our air quality. And that's the air quality, the bad air quality is primarily caused by automobiles and wildfires. They say that Prop 30 would make zero emission vehicles more affordable and it would create green jobs. They say that it would fund critically needed programs to prevent wildfires and protect homes, and that includes strict accountability measures. And the supporters have raised $19 million, and that has come from Lyft, the rideshare company. The opponents include the Howard Jarvis Taxpayer Association, the California Teachers Association, Governor Newsom, and the Small Business Association. And they say that California is already spending more than $50 billion on a multi-year climate investment. And that does include some money for zero emission vehicles. They say that there's no guarantee that Prop 30 will make zero emission vehicles more affordable, that it locks money into special interests, and that the proposition was written by Lyft to try to get taxpayers to foot the bill for increasing the number of zero emission vehicles that they're going to be required to have. And the opponents have raised about $6 million. And the largest donations, interestingly, have come from real estate developers and a lumber company, and then just several wealthy individuals. So the question is, should the tax rate on personal income above $2 million be increased by 1 3/4%? And the revenue be dedicated to zero emission vehicle subsidies, infrastructure, and wildfire suppression and prevention. So a yes vote means you want this tax increase, and a no vote means you don't. So any questions? Nope. Okay.
Does the bill talk about the cost to upgrade the California infrastructure to handle the estimated number of zero emission vehicles? Where does that money come from, and what is the cost of that?
Well, the money that you're saying would come from this, part of it, at least, excuse me, would come from the tax increase. And I don't think I've seen anything anywhere that says exactly how much they think it would cost to do the infrastructure upgrade. But yeah, the idea is that a good chunk of that required funding would come from this tax increase.
That needs to come before the people buy the cars.
That's true.
And so you're not going to get that money until the cars. And that's the fundamental issue is that needs to be in place. Okay. And not all at once, but certainly gradually in terms of that plan. And that's what it's not clear if anybody is done numbers on that. And you just take the number of vehicles. You got 600 million vehicles. They're going to charge whatever between time. This is the current cost. What's going to be the future cost, whatever it is, to estimate what that would cost to be able to build. That means lots of new power plants, probably lots of things that involve right of way. And anytime you start to look at something that involves right of way, generally you're going to have some type of protracted legal argument about why it can't be built there. And so that would be my concern about it. It doesn't give you those costs, okay, to pay for that. And also coupling it with the firefighters is like kind of like oh gee, we need to stop the fires, okay, so let's just throw this in together. The way they've packaged it is most annoying.
Okay. Anybody else with comment, question? Okay, let's do Prop 31. 31 is a little bit different animal. 31 is a referendum, and a referendum is basically the people, you and I, being asked if we like something that the legislature has done. So the legislature will pass a law, and then some people will say, well, I don't like it. You have to collect signatures. And if enough signatures are collected, it'll go on the ballot, and then we get to vote on whether we like what the legislature has done. So Proposition 31 is about the possible repeal of a law that the legislature passed that prohibits the sale of certain flavored tobacco products. So in 2020, the legislature passed a bill, which is called SB 793, that bans the sale of certain flavored tobacco products like cigarettes, e-cigarettes, chewing tobacco, and snuff. There's a couple of exceptions. Handmade cigars are an exception, loose leaf tobacco is an exception, and tobacco that's used in water pipes like hookahs. It's not covered by this. So as soon as the legislature passed this bill in 2020, the tobacco companies leaped into action. They immediately began the signature gathering process for this referendum to say, no, we don't want it. And so what happens when this kind of thing happens, the law that is being questioned just sits there. It can't be put into place, can't be enforced. It's like it's not there. And it cannot be put into place until we vote. And so the tobacco companies got enough signatures, they qualified for the ballot. And so everybody had to wait until next month to see how we vote, to see whether this law will actually go into effect. So basically Prop 31 is asking you if you want SB 793 to take effect. So the legislative analyst says that the fiscal effects of this will largely depend on how much tobacco sales decrease as the result of SB 793. If they say that it could reduce state tobacco tax revenues from anywhere from $10 million to $100 million a year. And then this reduction would affect programs that are funded by tobacco taxes like healthcare, early childhood programs, tobacco control, medical research. But if smokers merely switch to unflavored products and they still keep on smoking, then the loss of the revenue will be smaller. If they stop smoking entirely, then the revenue loss will be greater. So the supporters of SB 793, of the supporters of this law that bans flavored tobacco, they say that big tobacco targets kids. They say that 80% of the kids who smoke start by using this flavored tobacco because it hides the taste. They say that tobacco is the #1 preventable cause of death in California. It kills 40,000 people a year. And they say that big tobacco actually preys on minority neighborhoods because minority neighborhoods generally favor the menthol flavored tobacco products. By like 85% of them prefer menthol flavored cigarettes. So the supporters of SB 793 have raised about $5.5 million. And this has come largely from the Kaiser Health Foundation and from the American Heart Association, and Michael Bloomberg has contributed a lot of money in support of this law. The opponents, you might have guessed, are big tobacco. And the opponents say that it's already illegal to sell tobacco products to anyone under 21, so we shouldn't be worrying about kids smoking. They say that prohibition doesn't work, and that SB 793 doesn't provide any extra money for law enforcement. And they say that the law would primarily impact minority neighborhoods because there would be increased criminal activity, because there would be black market crime for people selling the flavored tobacco products. So as up to date, about $21 million has been raised in opposition, and it has come from R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris. So the question is, should SB 793, which is the law that bans the sale of flavored tobacco products, should that law be allowed to take effect? So if you like this law, you would vote yes. If you don't like the law, you would vote no, and the law would just be removed from the books. So any questions?
The way it was worded, it says it's the people were being asked if we like, it's a repeal of the law that prohibits the ban. So it's like a double negative. So does that mean that a no vote actually means that we want SB 793 to go ahead? You see what I'm saying?
No, a yes vote means you like the law.
Okay, you're sure. Okay.
Yes.
It's just
yes
somehow
vote
the wording sounded confusing. Okay,
I know,
thank you.
yeah, the referendums are kind of a weird animal, but yes, a yes vote means you like the law.
Okay.
A no vote means you don't like the law.
And can we assume that even if the law goes into effect, all of these products are still available to be bought over the internet?
I would guess so, yeah, or in the black market, one of the two, but yeah. But you wouldn't be able to get them at, your local smoke shop or the grocery store or anywhere legally. Other questions? So shall we do the county measures, A and C? Dave, is that? Okay, so we'll do the county measure A. County measure A is a charter amendment to the Los Angeles County Charter, and it has to do with providing the authority to the Board of Supervisors to remove an elected sheriff for cause. And so the question is, should the LA County Board of Supervisors be authorized to remove a sheriff from office by a 4/5 vote? So 4 out of the 5 supervisors would have to vote this, and they could remove the sheriff for cause after they get a written notice and have an opportunity to be heard. So the situation is that the LA County Sheriff leads one of the largest law enforcement agencies in the United States. The supervisors have recently expressed concern over the lack of accountability and transparency in the sheriff's department. And this just didn't start with the current sheriff. This has been going on for a number of years. And in fact, in 2016, the board implemented a sheriff civilian oversight commission, and their charter is to improve public transparency and accountability. But there has been resistance to the commission's oversight by current and previous sheriffs. And the California Constitution actually allows a county charter to provide for the terms and removal of any elected appointed county officer. So this would be allowed, if it were to pass, it would be allowed by the California Constitution. So Measure A would amend the charter of the County of Los Angeles to allow the Board of Supervisors to remove a sheriff from office for cause. And for the purposes of this measure, cause is defined as a violation of a law that related to the sheriff duties, flagrant or repeated neglect of the sheriff's duties, misappropriation of funds or property, willful falsification of a relevant official statement or document, or obstruction of any investigation into the conduct of the sheriff's department. So the action to remove the sheriff would require a 4/5 vote by the board, and the sheriff would have to be given an opportunity to be heard, given advance notice and an opportunity to be heard. Fiscal effects, if this were to pass, the fiscal effects would be negligible. Supporters of Measure A say that the sheriff wields an exceptional amount of power, and more than people like some other elected county officials like the county assessor. And they say that voters should decide whether this is the right way to enhance the accountability of the sheriff. And the opponents say that this measure should apply to all 8 elected county officials, including the supervisors. And opponents say that the board is attempting to cheat the system and create a fast track pathway to remove a duly elected sheriff. The supporters are 4 out of the 5 county supervisors. So it was Sheila Kuehl, Hilda Solis, Holly Mitchell, and Janice Hahn. The opponents include actually our county supervisor, Catherine Barger, and the sheriff opposes this. So anyway, that's Measure A. Any questions? Mary? You're muted.
Sorry. This amends the charter.
Yes.
What other way is there to really essentially fire the sheriff?
Well, since they're elected, I think apparently there is not another way to actually remove a person from office. So, Suzanne?
Yes.
Did you have a question? Okay, never mind. Anybody else? Okay, County Measure C. This one I had to do a lot of digging to figure out get the details on it, but it has to do with a tax on cannabis businesses in unincorporated Los Angeles County. So this isn't like any of the cities. This is all the unincorporated areas like, Altadena, or I think there's a little chunk of East Pasadena that's unincorporated. So this has to do with taxing businesses in those areas. So the question is, should the county enact a tax in the unincorporated areas of Los Angeles County on cannabis businesses at a rate that's not to exceed $10 per square foot for places that are cultivating marijuana, or a percentage of gross receipts for different kinds of businesses that sell it, things like that. So right now, cannabis businesses are prohibited in the unincorporated parts of LA County. Although there's a lot of illegal cultivation and sale that goes on. Many cities within the county have already established licensing and tax rates for businesses within their boundaries. And so the county is now working on developing a licensing procedure to develop and implement equitable system, licensing system, so that these kinds of businesses could exist in unincorporated areas of the county. So assuming that they develop this licensing program and people get licensed, Measure C would authorize those businesses to be taxed. And so the rates for retail, manufacturing, distribution, and testing businesses would be taxed at a rate of somewhere between 1% and 4%. Businesses that cultivate marijuana, businesses would have to be indoor only. So there couldn't be any large outdoor pot farms in LA County. They would have to be indoor, and they would be taxed at somewhere between $2 and $7 a square foot. Personal cannabis cultivation would be exempt from this. So if you're growing it in your yard, you don't have to be taxed. And some other provisions of Measure C would be that tax rates would become effective next July. And the proposed tax rates could be adjusted by the Board of Supervisors after 2026. And beginning in 2027, the tax rates for cultivation would be adjusted for inflation based on the consumer price index. Anybody illegally growing or distributing cannabis products would also have to be taxed. And so this would allow for the county to prosecute them for tax evasion. And the revenue that's derived from this tax, which is projected to be somewhere between 10 and $15 million a year, would be deposited into the county's general fund and then could be used for any county governmental purpose. So the supporters say that Measure C promotes the distribution and consumption of safe and unadulterated cannabis through a legal regulated market, that the low starting tax rates are strategically designed to ensure the viability of a legal market. And they say that the tax revenue would be redistributed to all of LA County through projects that are funded through the county's general fund. The opponents say that cannabis business tax rates for the incorporated areas, so those are places, cities that already allow cannabis, they're classified and measured differently than how the county's proposing, and that would prompt a consideration of fairness. You know, is it fair that the rates would be different in a city versus the unincorporated area of the county? They say that if we don't start adjusting the tax rates for based on the consumer price index until 2027, that we're going to get less money because inflation is going to go up faster than, you know, before we get to 2027. And they also say that because right now there are so few licensing permits that are granted, that the illicit market is going to continue to exist for years to come. And the measure was placed on the ballot by a 4/5 vote of the Board of Supervisors. So any questions? Okay, Dave, did you have?
Yeah, are the tax rates comparable to the city of Los Angeles? You know?
I don't know. I don't know what the city of Los Angeles is, but it's interesting. I read somewhere that 80% of the municipalities in California have already decided to ban cannabis businesses. So a lot of cities are just saying, we don't want to deal with it, so we're banning it. So, and I don't know what the tax rates are in some of the other cities. So do we want to do the Pasadena city ones?
Can you say the no or yes on this again, please? So if you vote
Okay,
no-
so a yes vote means that you would want cannabis businesses in the unincorporated areas to be taxed. And a no vote means that you do not want these businesses to be taxed.
Okay, thank you.
Can you tell us who the no vote was on the Board of Supervisors?
You know, I can't. Sorry, I don't know who. Let me see.
Just wondered if it was our supervisor.
Yeah, I don't know. Don't know. I
Okay, that's fine.
don't have that information. So.
And this has, sorry.
Go ahead.
This has nothing to do with whether or not they're going to move ahead with the licensing process in the unincorporated areas anyway. So this is just saying if they do that, they can be taxed. That's all it is, right?
Correct.
It doesn't,
Correct.
yeah. And the cities that are unincorporated could still choose to ban sales just like any other city, should they choose to.
Well, if it's a city, unincorporated means there's no city. Unincorporated
gotcha.
Means it's under the auspices of the Board of Supervisors. So,
gotcha.
yeah, Elsa?
Thank you.
You're muted.
I thought I had unmuted. Thank you. I was wondering, because there's great usage of cannabis within the senior population, what is this going to mean to the procurement of cannabis for pain and well-being, et cetera, for the senior population?
Well, it won't have any effect. I mean, if you usually, excuse me, get your medication in an unincorporated area right now, that there's no change. It's And, you know, each individual city, again, has made rules about whether they're going to allow the business, and if they are, how it's going to be taxed. So, you know, it just depends on where you get the materials. So,
Well, taxed or not, it depends on where you get the materials.
yeah. So if you get them in an unincorporated area right now, it's probably illegal because they're not licensed in unincorporated areas yet. But if you get it in and this doesn't deal with cities. So if you get your supplies in a city, then this law has no effect on that because the cities have their own laws.
The city does, but the county doesn't.
Yeah, which each city makes its own laws and the county has nothing to say about that. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So shall we do Pasadena Measure H?
Robbie, if your voice is going to hold out, I think we'd love to.
I think I've got my lemonade here, so I'm gonna
Okay.
motor on. So Pasadena Measure H is a change to the Pasadena City Charter and also laws, ordinances, and it's about rent control. So rents and evictions statewide are regulated by a state law that's called Costa-Hawkins, and it was passed in 1995. So are there limits on rent increases at 5% plus the consumer price index? These laws require landlords to have just cause. So you can't just toss somebody out. There has to be just cause, like they didn't pay their rent or they're creating a nuisance. Sometimes it requires relocation payments in case the owner moves a family member into it, and they might have to pay the existing tenant a relocation payment. So under this law that was passed in 2020, multifamily housing units that are built in the last 15 years, and most single family residences and condominiums are currently exempt from rent caps. And they're also exempt from the just cause provisions. One thing about Pasadena, 62% of Pasadena residents are renters, and they have experienced an average 20% increase in rents over just the past year. And there are several cities in LA County that already have rent control, and also the unincorporated areas of the county have rent control. So Measure H would establish a council-appointed 11-member rental housing board, which would include 7 tenants, and then there would be 4 other people. And that board would be independent of oversight by the city council, the city manager, or the city attorney. And the board would determine rent adjustments. It would conduct investigations. It would adjudicate petitions, and it would establish some regulations. Measure H would limit subsequent rent increases to 75% of the consumer price index increase. And both landlords and tenants could petition the board if they feel like a rent adjustment is not fair. Measure H would limit evictions to just cause, and the evictions in the city of Pasadena. And it would require landlords to pay relocation assistance in situations where they have to do major repairs to the unit, or if they move a family member into the unit and have to displace a current tenant. So Measure H does not apply to some various specific uses. It doesn't apply to care facilities. It doesn't apply to subsidized housing. The rent increase caps also don't apply to any multifamily unit that was built since 1995. And it doesn't apply to single family homes, and it doesn't apply to condominiums. And so this means that Measure H would apply to about 84% of Pasadena's current rental housing stock. So 84% of our rental housing stock was built before 1995, or it falls into one of the categories of single family homes or condominiums. So the fiscal implications, the city attorney estimates that the startup cost to organize this rental housing board would be about $300,000. That's just to start it up. And then annually, they estimate the costs would be about $5.5 million to support the employee. They think about 26 employees would have to be required to support this board, rental housing board. And then ongoing expenses would be financed by charging landlords an annual rental housing fee, which has been estimated to be about $184 per year per unit. So depending on how many units the landlord has, that would determine how much money that they would have to pay. And again, that money would go to support this housing board. So the supporters of Major H include a city council member, Pasadena Affordable Housing Services, and the Pasadena Foothills ACLU. And they say with Measure H, Pasadena would join the rest of LA County and then various cities around California that have enacted real and fair rent control. They say Measure H has no impact on new affordable housing because state law exempts all units built since 1995 from rent control. They say that Measure H will be funded by a small fee on landlords, and homeowners and taxpayers are not going to be paying anything. And they say that Measure H was placed on the ballot by signatures of over 15,000 Pasadena voters. The opponents include a former mayor of Pasadena, a former member of the city council, and a community member. And they say that Measure H is unnecessary because the legislature enacted this AB 1482, which already has some strict protections for renters. They say Measure H will reduce or will worsen our local housing crisis and will cost the city nearly $6 million a year to administer. They say that the proposed rental housing board will have unchecked authority, which is bad government. And they say that Measure H was actually financed by an organization in San Francisco and Los Angeles, and it wasn't financed by locals. So the question is, should the city charter be amended to create an appointed rental housing board? And should rent increases be regulated for the rental units that are covered? And the conditions have to be specified under which landlords could terminate tenancies. So a yes vote means you want these changes, and a no vote means that you don't. Questions? Yeah, Wayne?
Maybe I missed this, but does it exempt mom and pop landlords?
It exempts single family homes. So I'm not.
But not somebody that owns like a 2-unit apartment or something.
Right. Mary?
Do you know the mayor or the councilman who are opposing this?
The former councilman is Paul Little. And who was the former mayor? I don't remember. I do know that Paul Little is the one that the former council member who opposes this.
Okay.
I think the former mayor is, I believe it's Terry Tornick.
I
believe.
that makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Should we? Measure L, Pasadena Measure L. This is a pretty easy one. Yay. Measure L is a parcel tax. And it's a continuation of an existing parcel tax. And the money will go to Pasadena libraries. And the background on this is that in June of 1993, we established initially as a 5-year special tax to save the Pasadena library's existing services and operations. We extended the tax in 97. We extended it again in 2007 with more than the 2/3 support required. And it's currently scheduled to expire in this coming February. And it costs approximately $41 a year for a single family residence or a condominium unit. So the proposal would just be to extend, Measure L would extend this existing tax for another 15 years. So if passed, it would expire in 2038, and the funds would be used to maintain books and collections, maintain literacy and youth reading college prep programs. It would ensure computer and Wi-Fi access for the libraries, and it would prevent closure of some of the neighborhood branches. The measure would continue the current rates with annual increases that were limited by the Consumer Price Index, and exemptions are provided for people with low income property owners. The funds that are earned are subject to annual audits and can't be used for anything except library operations, and they may not be used for capital improvements. So they would not be able to be used for doing the earthquake retrofitting on the main library. It's all for operating expenses. The fiscal implications, the city attorney says that if Measure L fails, the city would lose about 20% annually of the library budget. And this could lead to closure of neighborhood branches and the loss of librarians and cuts in services and programs. Supporters include the mayor of Pasadena, the president of the PCC Board of Trustees, and the president of the PUSD School Board. They say that a yes vote will protect our libraries from drastic service cuts for 15 years. It's not a new tax. It does not raise any existing tax. The libraries have over 1 million visitors annually, and they're a great assistance to vulnerable citizens during the pandemic. And they say if Measure L fails, the impact would be especially severe on seniors and lower income families. And there were no arguments were submitted against Measure L. So the question is, should Pasadena's existing parcel tax that funds the Pasadena library system be extended for an additional 15 years? So a yes vote means you want the tax to be extended, and a no vote means you don't.
So we have no resolution of the seismic retrofit problem then, do we?
Nope, not from this. So that's going to find another source of funding somehow for that. And then do we want to do the Measure PCC? That would be the last one. Yay.
Well, about the library funding, how is before these augmentations were instituted, how was the library funded? And is there something in the charter of the libraries that says only a minimum number of libraries can be funded with our normal parcel tax?
I'm not sure I understand about the minimum number, what you mean.
Well, they're saying if we do not accept this new ballot measure, some libraries may be closed.
Right.
We don't know how many libraries maybe it could be, down to the main library. I mean, what is currently required by law?
I'm not sure that there's any specific requirement for the number of libraries. I guess they would take a look, excuse me, at usage at the various branches and then decide based on usage which ones would be closed, and the ones that had lower usage, then they could move the staff to some of the other ones. But I don't think there's anything in the library charter that says you have to have X number of branches. Okay, well, let's just do one more, PCC. And PCC is a bond measure. And so it requires 55% approval to pass. And the subject is the sale of general obligation bonds to pay for facility upgrades for the community college. So just a kind of a brief thing on bonds. They're a form of long-term borrowing by a government, and they're traditionally used to finance capital projects such as facilities and infrastructure. So investors buy the bonds, they're lending money to the government, and then they get paid back with interest. Bonds must be voter approved because they are paid for by an increase in property tax. And bond debt is usually repaid over 30 years, and the final cost of a bond is about $2 for every dollar borrowed. So the background of this is Pasadena Community College serves Altadena and then 7 cities in the San Gabriel Valley. Many of the facilities at the college are over 50 years old, and they need major structural repair to meet health and safety requirements. And they also need upgrades for technology, advances in modern technology. So in 2002, we actually approved a bond measure, Measure P, which authorized the sale of $150 million in bonds. And property owners, you and I, and anybody who owns property, is currently levied about a little bit less than 1 cent per 100 of assessed value of your property, and that pays for the bonds. And the funds from these bonds from 2002 have been fully allocated. So the proposal is that the community college district would issue $565 million in general obligation bonds. And those bonds would be used to upgrade instructional technology and career training, to fix deteriorating roofs and plumbing and electrical systems, to remove mold and asbestos and lead pipes, ensure that the facilities meet earthquake standards, and make the campus more energy and water efficient. And so the bonds would be repaid by levying 2 cents per $100 of assessed property value. So none of this money could be used for administrative salaries. There would be a citizens oversight committee that would be created to monitor the expenditure. Oops. Would be created to monitor expenditures, and there would be annual audits, and all funds would be locally controlled. The fiscal implications are the property taxes within the district, so within Altadena and the 7 cities, they would be raised by 2 cents for each $100 of assessed valuation. So this is not market price, but assessed value. So for example, a property that's assessed at $500,000 would pay an additional $100 a year in property tax. And this levy would raise about $32 million a year, and is expected to end in 2051, so in 30 years, after having raised about $950 million, which is, like I said, a little, not quite double what the original sale price of the bonds was. As part of the proposed capital improvements, they say that the proceeds from the sale of these bonds could also be used as matching funds to be able to get grants from the state or from private money to help pay for housing for some of the homeless students that attend PCC. And I went looking, and at press time, I could not find any published arguments either for or against PCC. So the question is, what should the Pasadena Community College District issue $565 million in general obligation bonds, levying 2 cents per $100 of assessed property value while the bonds are outstanding, with citizen oversight and all the money locally controlled? And this measure was put on the ballot by the PCC Board of Trustees. So a yes vote means you approve of issuing these bonds, and a no vote means you don't. So any questions? Comments? Whatever.
Robbie, that was terrific.
Thank you.
We won.
Yay.
Thank you. Thank you.
We've survived another proposition.
We did. We did. So just remember, vote, if you vote by mail, the ballot has to be postmarked by November 8th, by midnight, November 8th. Don't forget to sign the envelope. And otherwise, there are some of the voting centers that are going to be open early. And I think by October 29th, some of the voting centers will be open. And you can go to the LA County Registrar to find out where the vote centers are going to be. And that is lavote.gov. And that they're not up yet. But I looked the other day and they're not up yet, but they will have a list of where all the vote centers will be. If you like to vote in person. I like to vote in person, but whatever. So, yeah, Mary?
Yeah, I echo the question in the chat room. Will the recording be available, and if so, where and how, of this session that you just did?
Yeah,
Such a good job.
as quickly as I can, I'm going to get the video available on YouTube, but specifically you can find it by looking at our Pasadena Village website and going to presentation recordings. It's under a category called events, I believe.
Thank you. And then ultimately it will be on YouTube?
Yes, it will. That's where we store it.
Okay. Thank you. That's great.
Thank you, Robbie. That was great.
You're welcome. I didn't know that it would
Thank you all for coming.
take this long, but
Vote wisely.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. This is an invaluable service.
oh, thank you very much. Well, if you like the League of Women Voters, you can join or send us a donation. Yay.
I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay. All right.